So it is a privilege to introduce Professor Brennan. I do have a confession to make to everybody here. I am a fangirl. I've known Deb for a long time and really appreciated the work that Deb did in being able to help form NACBACS, which was the National Association of Community-Based Children's Services many, many years ago, that morphed into the Australian Community Children's Services. And Deb's been an absolute strong advocate for the sector, for quality, for recognition of the profession across the span of her career. Deb's been an influencer in policy design in the EC sector and is a change maker. Please refer to your bio in the convening book for more details of Deb's the work that she's done over her time, because I don't want to take up her time listening to me. But this is an opportunity for Deb to share with us her reflections of the Productivity Commission inquiry, and she's very generously going to offer some time for us to ask any questions. So I'd now like to hand over to Deb. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kim. It's lovely to be here. I had a glimpse into the room a moment ago and I could see a number of familiar faces. I could see some others online, and I too have a very warm memory of the 2019 timeline discussion with the new group of Apiary Fellows. I really do have huge admiration for the work that's being done through the Apiary Fellowship. I think that the cultivation of a generation of leaders that's going to transform the sector or contribute in your generation to the next iteration of the sector is really wonderful work. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the inquiry and some of our central recommendations and a little bit about how they fit together and how we came up with them. I thought I'd just to begin with say a tiny bit about the Productivity Commission and the task that government gave it, even though I know you are a very informed group. You've probably been many different places today in your discussions. So I just thought that might be the place to start. Because for me, I've learned a huge amount about the Productivity Commission over the last 18 months. And I have to say my respect for the Productivity Commission was deepened by my engagement with it. So just as a little refresher, Productivity Commission is an independent body, an independent research body that advises government on issues affecting the welfare of Australians. That's part of its official legislative remit. Originally, of course, it focused on economic policy. It's been around for over 50 years. So originally very focused on economic policy, and that's there, of course, very clearly in the name, but its reach now extends into social and environmental issues, energy policy, and so on. So the PC actually developed the paid parental scheme that we now have in Australia, and it's done some wonderful work in mental health as well. So, and you know, it's also done work in ECEC, operating perhaps from some rather different parameters in terms of reference compared with the recently completed inquiry, but it's no stranger to our sector. But of course, the Productivity Commission can actually dream up some work that it does itself. But in the case of the inquiry into early childhood education and care completed this year, it was responding to terms of reference from the Federal Treasurer. And again, I think you know this, but just as a little reminder, the Treasurer asked the PC to develop options for a universal system of early childhood education and care that would both support children's learning and development and also support parents' workforce participation. And I know that I think I can say everyone in the sector was thrilled to see those terms of reference with the dual focus and not just an economic and workforce related approach to ECEC. The Productivity Commission doesn't make policy, it provides advice to government. And I think that's a really important distinction because PC has put forward a set of recommendations. I know that the government is, I understand that the government is listening now to how the community and key organisations will respond to those recommendations, and then government itself will make its own response, perhaps in the context of an election campaign or perhaps in another way. A few things I would say about my experience of the inquiry. As I said at the beginning, I didn't know, I knew what everybody knows about the PC, those vast volumes of very detailed reports and data, and I, of course, had experience of earlier inquiries, but I hadn't been inside the belly of the beast, so to speak, before. And I did find the process of the inquiry extremely rigorous and extremely consultative. As I think you would all know, I was one of 3 commissioners, Martin Stokey and Lisa Gropp, are full-time commissioners with the PC. And my role as Associate Commissioner was, of course, just for the one inquiry. The PC doesn't always bring in an Associate Commissioner. So I think it spoke well, I think, both of government and the PC, that they wanted to have that outside expertise. And I felt, there were plenty of occasions where we had robust disagreements and robust exchange of views, but I can say that I felt that the sector as a whole, and me personally, was very much listened to in the inquiry. When I first arrived, the first thing I was asked to do was to put forward a list of people and organisations that I thought the PC ought to consult with as part of the inquiry. They'd already developed their own list and they augmented it with mine. And I do think that the consultation process was, as I said, very rigorous and very extensive. We went to every state and territory. We visited many, many services. We spoke with families, educators, service directors, peak organisations. And I'd like particularly to mention here that through the Front Project, together with the Creche and Kindergarten Association, the voices of children were brought to the Productivity Commission inquiry as well. In the brief amount of time I have today, I won't be elaborating on that, but I can tell you that was a big first for the Productivity Commission. The reports of the consultations with children are on the Productivity Commission website. So that's both the consultations with 3 to 5-year-old children that Front Project and CNK did for us, and also consultations with older children that Jennifer Cartmill and her colleagues did in relation to outside school hours care. I know these minutes are going to go very, very quickly, so I'm kind of adapting a little bit on the fly as I go, because I'm not speaking about everything in the inquiry, but I want to pick out the things that I think you'll be maybe the most interested in, and that will resonate with this group. Before I get on to talking about the recommendations and the substance of the report itself in terms of for the future of the sector, I want to mention that the very first supporting paper of the Productivity Commission inquiry is a review of the evidence about the benefits of children participating in early childhood education and care. It's a very tough analysis in the sense that there's virtually no qualitative research discussed there. It's very much the most kind of rigorous gold standard black hat approach that you can take to the evidence. I found that frustrating in some ways when we were doing it, but when we got to the end, I thought, you know, we actually have such a strong piece of analysis here. And even after the toughest and most rigorous standards of evidence have been applied, the PC is coming out with a very clear statement which says children benefit from attending high quality education and care. And although that's something that we in the sector know and have known for a long time, it really carries some weight, I believe, when the PC says that. And particularly when the PC brings forward the evidence about the strength of the evidence in relation to benefits for the most disadvantaged children. So I just wanted to mention that I'm going to put that aside largely, but actually I should say two things. There's the analysis of the evidence and its the potential impacts and benefits. And then there's the analysis of the data, which says, but under our current arrangements, it's the children who would benefit the most from quality ECEC who are missing out. We know who those children are. They're particularly children from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and communities. They're children from language backgrounds other than English, children from regional and remote Australia, and children from low-income families. And I can tell you that those two pieces of evidence put together made a very profound impact on the inquiry team, both the strength of the evidence of the potential benefits and then that pattern of access that we see, which really is the kind of motivator for where we went as a commission in terms of developing our recommendations. So I'm pretty sure that you are all familiar with the key recommendations, but I'll just summarise them so that I can then go back and elaborate on a couple. We had to, as part of the inquiry, we had to decide what a universal system means. And I know that many of you engaged with the inquiry on that very question. There's lots of different and competing ideas about what universal means. And we had to come up with a definition and a set of recommendations. And what we came up with in the end was that a universal system is one that would ensure that all children aged 0 to 5 have access to at least 30 hours or 3 days of quality early childhood education and care for 48 weeks of the year, and that out-of-school hours care is available in all public schools where there's sustainable demand. Lots of words in there that I could elaborate on, but I'll just plough on for the time being. In terms of specific recommendations, we put to government that they should remove the activity test entirely. That was a change between our draft and final reports, and raise the maximum subsidy to 100% of the hourly rate cap for low-income families, and indeed lift the taper so that all families eligible for CCS would financially benefit from our recommendations, although to different degrees. We advised government that they would need to actively support and in some cases deliver supply in areas where the market, whether we were talking for profit or not for profit, where private providers may not go. And that's a really important element of our recommendations. We have a very strong set of recommendations around inclusion and the need to enhance and expand needs-based inclusion funding, in addition to introducing some short-term, pretty urgent reforms to the inclusion support program, which is simply not working well enough. We argued, or we put to government, that in order to deliver a universal system of ECEC, work needs to be done to facilitate ongoing quality improvement in the sector, and that there should be some new governance arrangements, including a new agreement, a national agreement between the states, territories and the Commonwealth, and the establishment of an Early Childhood Education and Care Commission. Underlying that, and I perhaps could have put this first, but we said to government, you have to prioritise challenges around the workforce. Unless we do something to stem the flow of educators and teachers from our services and build strength and capacity, as obviously is happening through the Apiary Fellowship, but without an enormous amount of attention to the challenges faced by the workforce, our reforms are going absolutely nowhere. So that's a very large part of our recommendations. In the few minutes that are left, I just want to say a little bit about the key planks of access, quality and inclusion, the three pillars, if you like, of the Productivity Commission vision of a universal system. Under the heading of access, we considered both supply, i.e. do families actually have access to a service, and affordability. Can they afford it? And what should government be doing about affordability? In regards to the former, access and supply, it's the view of the Productivity Commission, and I agree with this, that the reforms we've suggested around increasing the childcare subsidy would lead to some response, a considerable response by private providers in substantial parts of Australia. But we're still of the view that there will be outer suburban areas, regional centres and remote and very remote communities that are going to need direct support, government assistance with supply. And the Productivity Commission actually says that not-for-profit providers should be preferred in many of those areas. We also recommended, and we had extensive consultation with Aboriginal organisations throughout the inquiry, particularly with SNAIC, but not only with SNAIC, because we met with Aboriginal groups, I think, in pretty well every jurisdiction. And we recommended that there be specific arrangements for Aboriginal community-controlled organisations that are co-designed with local communities. That's one example of a very big difference between the 2024 Productivity Commission report and the one before. There are many other differences, but that's an important one. I'll say a little bit about affordability because I know that it's a very hot topic in the community, and one that we put an enormous amount of effort and thought into. There are lots of ways that you could improve affordability for families, and lots of suggestions were put to us in submissions and face-to-face meetings. In the end, the Productivity Commission modelled 6 different approaches to changing affordability, but we put particular emphasis on 3, and they're the ones that, if you've read the 60-page report, you will have come across. So option A, the one we recommended, removing the activity test, lifting the subsidy rate to 100% of the hourly rate cap for families earning up to $80,000 a year. And I think it's $140,000 a year if 2 or more children are in care, and lifting the taper so that all families benefit. Option B, we modelled, was the 90% subsidy for all families, and that was specified in the productivity, in the terms of reference given to the Commission by the Treasurer. And option C, a flat rate $10 per day for all children. That was also modelled because of the very strong community interest in that approach, partly because of the Canadian example, and partly because there's been very strong and effective advocacy around that model in the Australian community. In the end, as I'm sure you know, option A is the one that we advocated, and perhaps in conversation, if that's something that this group is interested in, I could say a little bit more about why it was that we we came down in favour of that option. We, in our report, put considerable emphasis on the topic of inclusion, and we have recommended a very new approach to supporting the inclusion of children and families with a range of different needs for support. These needs, as you know, go well beyond affordability, critical as affordability is. And so we have quite an extensive discussion of the barriers that many families face, practical barriers such as transport, food, even clothing, and other barriers that are to do with characteristics and experiences of families that may make it less likely that they will approach services. And we've recommended a considerable increase in inclusion funding, as well as the development of a new early childhood education and care inclusion fund. I can see the seconds are ticking away on my 20 minutes now, so I'll just finally mention the important role that we see for new governance arrangements in early childhood education and care. Particularly, we recommended the establishment of an early childhood education and care commission that would monitor the efforts and achievements and perhaps failures of achievement of governance at the state and territory level against the objectives that governments themselves will be setting, we hope and anticipate, through a new national agreement. We pulled back quite a bit on what that commission might do between our draft and final reports, but we did put a very strong recommendation to government that there needs to be some overarching stewardship and monitoring of the system. And finally, as you will know if you've had a chance to look at the report, we've put forward a 10-year timeline to governments to make real progress towards the goal of universal ECEC. But I would just in closing like to mention, to me, the integrity of this package, that I really hope that we're not going to see different bits picked off and other bits left behind, because I think that access, quality and inclusion, together with new governance arrangements and vital attention to the not just the pay, although pay is critical, but also to the experience of working in the ECE sector, are going to be absolutely essential to seeing us achieve our ambition of universal ECEC. So I'll leave my comments there. And I know we're going to have a conversation now, and I'm very happy to take questions as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Deb. That was a very insightful overview of what has been a very extensive Productivity Commission inquiry and the 56 recommendations. We have an opportunity to ask some questions, but I would like to pick up on one that you just finished with around the 10-year time frame and the integrity of the report. You know the Apiary, you've spent time with us. What's your advice to us in terms of how we might be able to elevate through the Apiary, through this collective, a position with government to, I guess, ensure that there isn't, that the integrity of the recommendations is not watered down?
Mm. Thanks for that question. Well, I guess at the outset, I'd say I don't want to presume your response individually or collectively to the PC report. I know that not every organisation or group is totally in tune with everything we've put forward. But what I'm hoping is that each organisation, having considered, and you may well have done this in your own context, your response to the report, particularly, and I'm really hoping that a lot of organisations are going to get on board with the recommendations and wish to endorse them. And if that's the case, I think your voices really need to be made known loud and clear to government. I wasn't able to be at the ECEC conference where Minister Clare announced the impending release of the Productivity Commission report, but I understand that he said at the conference that government was very keen to hear from the community what they made of the Productivity Commission recommendations. I understand there's not actually a process, or at least at this point, there's not a process for that happening. And if that's the case, then I think it's up to organisations to decide for themselves if they would like to make their views known directly to government, having consulted with their members or, you know, in the appropriate way. I was up in the Northern Territory a couple of weeks ago, and where there was a very, very positive response to the PEC recommendations. And I said to the educators and teachers there, what would be really effective, I think, would be if you took those recommendations into your own context and thought about what they would mean. What would it mean if ECEC was effectively no cost for families under $80,000 and governments had an obligation to create supply where private providers aren't going to go? What would it mean if we had the kind of proactive approach to inclusion that the PC has recommended? What would that mean in your community? And if you could make that known to government in a real context of real families and people, I think that's the kind of thing that that is potentially really effective. And Apiary Fellows, of course, are in a very special position, having been selected into this program because of your leadership abilities and further potential to develop, and because of your deep and considered approach to system reform. I think that you're in the Fellows and the Apiary is in a really important position to make effective representations.
Thank you, Deb. That was some very sound advice that I think I can see lots of nodding in the room. I know you can't see us, but
No.
we're on our screen. I'd just like to welcome anybody to ask a question if you would like. Jill?
Jill. So I really
Can you?
Yep, I can hear.
The question will come closer.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I really appreciated the focus on inclusion in the Productivity Commission recommendations. And I'm interested in how you grappled or what you considered around inclusion in that context and foundational supports as part of the NDIS review.
Thank you. We actually had to deliver our report before anything very much was known about foundational supports. And I still think we're very much on that journey to discovering. So I'll just say I will address that, but I'll just make some other more general comments, if I may, about inclusion and our approach to that. Basically, what we've said to government about inclusion is that it needs to do two things. In the medium term, that is, you know, within a couple of years, it needs to establish a totally new and much greater resourced early childhood education and care inclusion fund, which would have a disability and complex needs stream, which would probably work in a similar way to the way a lot of the ISP funding is working at the moment. But would also have a mainstream inclusion stream that would support a lot of that outreach that's needed in certain communities, and fund and provide funding to address the practical barriers that are faced by many families, and then an inclusion fund grants stream, I think, something like that, which would be available to upgrade physical facilities in order to ensure that children and families have access. So we've said that two things need to be done. There need to be immediate improvements to the ISP while it still exists, increasing the hourly subsidy rate for the additional educators, removing the limits on hours, providing temporary support while funding applications are being considered, looking at the adequacy of funding of the inclusion agencies and so on. So, but our view with the ECEC Inclusion Fund is that it be a lot more like the word has just escaped me, but the supports that are provided in public schools, or the funding that is provided in public schools, to recognise differences between communities. So rather than just relying on applications coming in saying we have this child with this particular set of needs, we've said to government, look at communities, look at where disadvantage is concentrated, and where disadvantage is concentrated, put resources before the children even arrive. So we think that's, I think that will be a major step forward. It would also be very expensive. So it would need to be something that I think government feels that community and the sector is really behind. With the changes to the NDIS, well, we're still, I guess, have a lot to learn about how that's going to unfold. But my thoughts are, firstly, if government accepts the recommendations of the PC, they really are going to transform the sector, particularly in some parts of Australia, and they're going to transform the day-to-day work of many directors, educators and teachers, because we're not talking about a drop-off service while parents go to work, or that, sorry, I shouldn't say it like that, but we're not just talking about a support for employed parents. We're talking about bringing in children who've never been near an ECEC service. And as you know, this is slow, painstaking, resource-intensive work. So, and it will change for many services, what actually happens day to day. Layer on top of that the potential impacts of changes to the NDIS that are going to require everyday or mainstream services to be the locus of support for many children who may previously have been siphoned off onto individualised pathways of clinical therapies and so on. We're talking about another huge transformation of the sector and a need for really intensive resourcing, supporting, in-service, pre-service training of the workforce in order to make this happen. So I think we're really still on the journey with finding out what's in store there, but I appreciate that being raised as a really critical factor that will need to be brought together with the recommendations of the PC as we move towards a universal system.
Thank you, Deb. Do you want to come? Thanks, Jamie. Do you want to come around here so that Deb can see?
Oh,
Yeah, join.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Professor Brennan, hi. It's Jamie Tang here from the 2024 Apiary
Hi,
Fellowship.
Jamie.
Thanks very much for making a bit of time today, and congratulations on a phenomenal piece of work.
Thank you.
I was really interested by the multidisciplinary nature of the commissioners, in particular the blend of economists and yourself as an ECEC policy and system expert. I was wondering whether you mentioned in your introductory remarks the robust debate and discussion that you no doubt had. Are you able to talk about any examples of aspects where you may have persuaded your economist colleagues into perhaps unexpected positions, or conversely where your colleagues might have moved you into unexpected positions, or if not, any general comments on that dynamic?
Thanks, Jamie. It's very nice to see you and other people that I'm seeing in different contexts that I know from other parts of our lives and work together. Yes, initially I was very challenged by the idea of working in a team that was entirely made up of economists, not just my two co-commissioners, but the team that sits behind us is also a team made up of people with economics degrees. Although they may have, many of them had additional disciplinary backgrounds as well in law, particularly one or two in social policy, none in early childhood. I think everyone in that team went through an enormous journey in terms of our learning. I really take my hats off to my co-commissioners and the depth of knowledge that they had acquired by the end of the inquiry from a standing start 18 months earlier. I also had some of my own views challenged. I have a statement in the report that says how strongly I do endorse the recommendations of the inquiry, and I do. But when I started off, I thought that I was going to end up in a different position, particularly around transformation of the funding system. And that was a surprise to me. I think it was a surprise to the commissioners to find themselves consulting with children as part of a formal PC inquiry. And I also think our recommendations throughout about consulting with communities, and that's deeply embedded in a number of the recommendations, is perhaps, I don't want to take full credit for that or any of these, because the submissions, the engagement we had with participants who came forward and met with us in person had a really deep impression on us all. So I think, yes, I did shift in some ways. My co-commissioners, I think, learnt a lot. I don't want to say they shifted because that will be ascribing things to them, but we would all say that we learnt an enormous amount to land where we did.
Thank you, Deb. And I'm really conscious of the time.
Yes.
Now 4:30. Do we have time for one more question, Deb?
Yeah.
Yeah. Another question from the floor? Prue, would you like to?
Hey Deb, nice to see you again.
Hi, Prue.
I was interested in your comments around thin markets and how the not-for-profits could go and be part of that solution. And I'm interested to know whether you're able to share any of the thoughts from you and your fellow commissioners around how you reached that conclusion and how you think it might actually manifest in a practical.
Well, yes. The view in the inquiry, and led particularly by Lisa and Martin, who are, after all, economists, is that if government adopts our recommendations around changes to the CCS, we would likely see a response by private providers, both for profit and not for profit, that would enable or support them to move into some communities where it's simply not been possible, particularly because the activity test just excluded so many families, and because if government goes with 100% CCS, that would make a really big difference in disadvantaged communities. But we all shared the view that there are still going to be parts of Australia, particularly rural and remote Australia, but also I think potentially in some of the outer suburbs where funding may just not work because of the complexity of communities, the needs of children and families, and where there's likely to need to be direct government intervention. And we all three, Lisa, Martin and myself, all were of the view that the non-profit sector should be the first port of call, particularly in those remote communities. And that's because of the record of the not-for-profits in those areas already. I have a stronger view than my colleagues, which I have put in the report, about government supporting even more actively the not-for-profit sector. That's not a formal recommendation, but I hope it carries a bit of weight coming from me at the end of the inquiry. But it was great to see all three commissioners able to endorse the role of the not-for-profit sector in thin markets, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. I hope you can hear me now. We've just had a
Yes,
little.
yes.
Share your reflections, Deb, so we really appreciate your time. I'd just now like to call upon an Apiary colleague who would like to just do a formal thank you.
Hi, Professor Deborah. Deb, it's Jill again.
Jill.
I'm just here to do the thank you on behalf of the Apiary Fellows here today. And I'd really like to thank you for sharing your insights and expertise. And your talk has really provided some depth and clarity on a very complex landscape we're all navigating to ensure an effective early learning opportunities for all children. I particularly wanted to call out your focus on inclusion and accessibility. Your commitment to this area is really greatly appreciated. And I know you are a strong voice in the Commission on this topic. We're so lucky to have someone of your calibre and experience to be invited on the Commission for this work. And I think you've brought deep intelligence, understanding of the issues, compassion, as well as a passion for and a commitment to the sector. And we'd really like to just thank you for your time today and for sharing your insights with us. So on behalf of all the Apiary.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you, Kim. It's an absolute delight to engage with the Apiary. I'm really thrilled to have had the opportunity to do it.